Some men get a call that shatters a quiet evening in one ring. I got a wedding invitation addressed to strangers, and that envelope told me more about my daughters than 3 years of birthday cards ever did. My name is Walter Reams. I'm 64 years old, and for 31 years I ran a precision tooling shop outside Fort Wayne, Indiana, the kind of place that makes the small metal parts nobody thinks about until a machine stops working. Bolts, fittings, the unglamorous guts of things that keep factories running. I built that business from a rented garage bay with 2 employees into a company that put both my daughters through college without either of them touching a loan. I did that on purpose. My own mother raised 4 of us alone after my father walked out when I was 9, and I remember exactly what it felt like to watch her count change at the grocery store, praying it would stretch to the register. I swore, standing in that garage the day I signed the lease, that no child of mine would ever have to do that math. So, when Renee was born, and then Josie 2 years later, I made myself a promise. These girls will never know what it feels like to go without. I kept that promise for 29 years. And then, on a gray Tuesday in April, an envelope showed up in my mailbox that ended it. It wasn't addressed to me. That was the first strange thing. It was addressed to my late wife, Carol, who's been gone 6 years now, care of our old address, forwarded twice by the post office before it finally found its way to my hands. Cream cardstock, gold foil lettering. A wedding invitation. Josie's wedding invitation, to a man I had never once met, at a venue I'd never heard of, on a date exactly 11 weeks away. I stood at my own kitchen counter and read it twice, certain I was misunderstanding something. Certain there had to be a matching envelope somewhere with my name on it that I'd simply misplaced. I called Josie, straight to voicemail. I told myself she was probably driving, or in a meeting, and left a message that I tried to keep light, even though my hands weren't entirely steady. Hey, sweetheart, it's Dad. Got something strange in the mail today. Give me a call when you get a chance. Nothing that day. Nothing the next. I called Renee, my oldest, figuring she'd know what was going on, because those two talk every single day, always have, ever since they were girls, sharing a bedroom and whispering after lights out. Straight to voicemail as well. Both of them, the same week. I told myself it was nothing. Girls get busy. They forget to charge their phones. I left another message, this one a little less steady than the first. Renee, it's Dad. I need to talk to you about something. Please call me back. 3 days passed like that. Nothing. By the 4th day, worry had curdled into something sharper. I sat in my recliner that night with the television on mute, the invitation propped against the lamp on the side table like it was staring back at me, and I ran every terrible scenario a father's mind can build. Had something happened to one of them? Had there been a falling out with the man I'd never met? Had somebody hurt my daughter and nobody had the courage to tell me? I picked up the phone and called Josie's number again, and this time, instead of voicemail, it rang twice and picked up. Dad. Her voice was flat, careful, like she'd rehearsed it. Josie, thank God. I got a wedding invitation in the mail addressed to your mother. I didn't even know you were engaged. What in the world is going on? There was a long pause on the line, long enough that I checked to see if the call had dropped. Then she exhaled, the kind of exhale you give before you say something you've been building up the nerve to say for a while. Dad, we need to talk, but not on the phone. Can you come to Renee's on Saturday? We'll all be there. Just come at 2. I should have pushed harder right then. I should have asked 100 questions. But some part of me, the part that had spent 29 years fixing whatever was broken in my daughters' lives, told myself that whatever this was, it would be easier face to face. I told her I'd be there. I hung up the phone and sat in that recliner a long time, staring at an invitation to my own daughter's wedding that had never been meant for me to see at all. Saturday came slower than any week of my life. I drove the 40 minutes to Renee's place outside Carmel with the invitation on the passenger seat, like some kind of evidence I needed to bring to trial. Renee's house is a nice one, brick colonial, the kind of place her husband Todd's salary in commercial real estate affords them, a house I helped with more than either of them likes to admit, back when the market dipped and their construction loan nearly buried them. I rang the bell at exactly 2 o'clock, the invitation folded in my jacket pocket like a subpoena. Renee opened the door, and for half a second, before anything was said, I saw something in her face I hadn't seen since she was 16 and had wrecked my truck without telling me for 2 days. Guilt wearing the mask of composure. "Hey, Dad," she said. "Come on in. Everyone's already here." Everyone turned out to be Josie, sitting stiff on the living room couch beside a young man I didn't recognize, and Todd, standing near the fireplace with his arms crossed like he was guarding something. I stood in that doorway for a moment, my whole chest tightening, waiting for someone to explain what everyone meant and why nobody had thought to invite me before an engraved piece of cardstock did. "Dad, this is Marcus," Josie said, gesturing at the young man beside her, who gave me a small, uncertain wave. "My fiancé." I nodded at him, tried to arrange my face into something that looked like warmth instead of the confusion actually sitting in my stomach like a stone. "Nice to finally meet you, son." "We wanted to tell you together," Renee said, taking a seat on the arm of the couch beside her sister, a united front the two of them had been practicing their whole lives. "As a family." "Tell me what, exactly," I said. "Because as far as I can tell, I found out my daughter's getting married from a piece of mail that wasn't even addressed to me." Josie's jaw tightened. She looked at Renee, some silent signal passing between them the way it always had, ever since they were girls whispering plans I was never quite let in on. Then she looked back at me, and her voice, when it came, was steadier than I expected, steadier than it had any right to be. "Dad, we've decided we're not inviting you to the wedding." I heard the words. I understood every single one of them individually. But strung together like that, they didn't fully register. The way your brain sometimes refuses a package it already knows will hurt too much to open. "You're not," I said slowly, inviting me, "to your wedding." "It's not because we don't love you," Renee said quickly, the way you'd try to soften a blow that was already landing. "It's because every time you're in a room with us, it becomes about you. About your opinions, your rules, your version of how things should go. This is Josie's day. We don't want it turning into another one of your lectures. I want to be honest with you about something, because I've had a lot of time since that afternoon to think about how I should have reacted. Some part of me wanted to raise my voice right then. Wanted to ask what exactly I had ever lectured them about besides paying their bills on time and treating people with respect. But that's not who I am, and it never has been. My mother raised 4 kids on a waitress's wages without ever once raising her voice at us, and whatever restraint I have, I got it from watching her. "What lectures?" I said instead, keeping my voice level even as my hands had gone cold. "Tell me one time I lectured either of you at a family event." Marcus shifted uncomfortably on the couch, clearly wishing he were anywhere else on the planet. Josie glanced at him, then back at me, and something in her expression hardened, the way it does when a person has decided ahead of time not to let themselves feel guilty. "Christmas, 2 years ago," she said. "You made a comment about Marcus's job. About how he should have a more stable career before we got married." "I asked what he did for a living," I said. "That's not a lecture, Josie, that's a question a father asks." "You asked in front of my whole family in a tone that made it clear you thought I was making a mistake." She snapped back, her composure finally cracking at the edges. "And Dad, that's not even the real reason. You know it's not." "Then tell me the real reason." Renee stood up from the arm of the couch, crossing her arms the same way Todd had been standing this whole time by the fireplace, like the two of them had synchronized their body language for this exact confrontation. "The real reason, Dad, is that Mom's not here anymore to soften things between us. And without her, every conversation with you turns into a negotiation. We're tired of managing you. We just want one day, one single day, that isn't about keeping the peace with Dad. Managing me." I stood in my own daughter's living room and heard the words "managing me" land somewhere just beneath my ribs, and for a moment I genuinely could not find a single thing to say back. "I flew out here," I started, then caught myself, because I hadn't flown anywhere. I'd driven 40 minutes on a Saturday afternoon, leaving a business I still ran 6 days a week to sit through this. "I drove out here because I got an invitation addressed to your dead mother, Josie. I have been calling both of you for 4 days out of my mind with worry that something had happened to one of you. And instead I find out you'd already decided, weeks ago it sounds like, to cut me out of the biggest day of your life. And you didn't have the decency to tell me yourselves before I found out through the mail." "We didn't know how to tell you," Josie said, and for just a second, just a flicker, I thought I saw something crack in her. Something closer to the daughter I actually raised. But Renee reached over and put a hand on her sister's shoulder, and whatever was cracking sealed itself back up. "We're telling you now," Renee said, her voice gone cool and final. "We wanted to do this in person, like adults, instead of letting you find out some other way and make a scene about it. That's more respect than you're giving us credit for." Respect. I stood there in that living room, the invitation still folded in my jacket pocket, and I thought about every recital, every tuition check, every 2 a.m. drive to pick one of them up from a party that had gone sideways. Every single year I had shown up for exactly this family, and I could not for the life of me locate where respect had entered this conversation at all. "So that's it," I said. 29 years, and I get uninvited to a wedding by a piece of mail I wasn't even supposed to see. "Dad, don't make this about a number," Josie said, and there it was again, that same hardness. Borrowed, I think, from her sister, because I had never once heard my younger daughter speak to me that way before this afternoon. "This isn't a punishment. It's a boundary." A boundary. I've built machine parts for 31 years. Walter Reams parts that go into hospital equipment, into aircraft components, into things that cannot afford to fail, and I have never once heard a word used so precisely to mean its exact opposite. A boundary protects something. What they were building in that living room wasn't a boundary. It was a wall, and I was standing on the wrong side of it, watching my own daughters finish laying the last bricks. I looked at Todd, still silent by the fireplace, arms still crossed, the picture of a man who'd learned a long time ago that staying quiet kept the peace in his own house. "You have anything to add here, Todd?" He shook his head, not meeting my eyes. "This is between you three, Walter. Not my place." Funny, I thought, how a man can live in a house I helped save from foreclosure and still find a way to stand at the edge of a conversation like a stranger. I didn't yell. "I want you to understand that clearly, because I've turned that afternoon over in my mind more times than I can count since, wondering if some part of them needed to see me break the way I'd just watched something break in myself. But I have never once raised my voice at either of my daughters in their entire lives, and I wasn't about to start in a living room I'd once helped pay the mortgage on." I stood up. I looked at Josie, then at Renee, two grown women I had poured my entire life into, standing there in a house built partly on my sacrifice, telling me I was something to be managed, a problem to be minimized on the one day that was supposed to matter most. "All right," I said quietly. "You want a day that isn't about managing me. I understand." "Dad," Josie started, but I was already reaching for the door. "No," I said, and my voice, for the first time that whole afternoon, came out steady in a way that surprised even me. "You've made yourselves very clear. I won't be a problem for either of you anymore." I drove home in silence that whole 40 minutes, the invitation still sitting in my jacket pocket like a stone I couldn't put down. I didn't cry until I pulled into my own driveway, sat there in the dark garage with the engine ticking as it cooled, and let it come the way I hadn't let myself in front of them. Not the composed, controlled disappointment I'd shown in that living room. The real thing, the kind that comes from somewhere underneath your ribs, the kind Carol used to be the only one who ever saw. I sat in that garage a long time thinking about her. 6 years gone, and I still sometimes reach for the phone to tell her something before I remember. I thought about what she would have said, sitting in that living room, watching our daughters draw a line around their own father like he was something to be quarantined. Carol wouldn't have stayed quiet the way I did. She'd have found the exact right words, gentle enough not to wound but sharp enough to land, the way she always could. I didn't have her gift for that. All I had was 31 years of building things that don't fail, and a growing, cold certainty settling into my chest about what came next. I went inside that night, made myself a plate of food I didn't eat, and sat at the kitchen table with a legal pad, the same yellow legal pad I'd used for 30 years to sketch out tooling specs and business decisions. I wrote at the top of the page, "What I have given them," and underneath it, I started writing, and I did not stop for almost 2 hours. The house Renee and Todd nearly lost to foreclosure, the one I quietly paid down $40,000 of principal on so the bank wouldn't take it, money I never once mentioned to either of them because I didn't want it hanging over their marriage. Josie's college tuition, paid in full, 4 years, private school, no loans, because I wanted her to graduate free instead of shackled. The car I'd bought Renee when hers died her senior year of college. The down payment I'd quietly wired for Josie's condo 2 years ago. Money she'd told her friends. I later learned that she'd saved up herself. The life insurance policy naming both of them equally, the one Carol and I had set up together the year Josie was born. The business itself, Reams Precision Tooling, which I had always assumed, without ever saying it out loud, would someday pass to whichever of them wanted it, or be sold and split between them when I was gone. I looked at that list for a long time. Then I picked up the phone and called my attorney, a man named Frank Delahunt who'd handled my business contracts for almost 20 years and who I trusted with things I wouldn't tell my own doctor. It was nearly 9 at night. He picked up on the fourth ring. "Walter," he said, "you don't usually call this late unless something's on fire." "Something is," I said. "Not the shop, my family." There was a pause, the kind a good lawyer gives you when he can hear in your voice that you're about to make a decision you won't be talking yourself out of by morning. "Tell me what happened," I told him. All of it. The invitation, the drive to Renee's, the living room, the word boundary landing in my chest like a diagnosis. Frank listened without interrupting, the way he always does, and when I finished, he was quiet for a moment. "You sure you want to do something about this tonight, Walter? Or you want to sleep on it and call me Monday?" "I've never been more sure of anything in my life," I said. "I want everything moved. The trust, the business succession plan, the beneficiary designations on the life insurance, all of it. Starting with pulling my name off Renee's mortgage assistance and calling in the balance of what I'm owed on that loan." "That loan was never formalized, Walter. You never made her sign anything." "I know," I said. "That was my mistake. I'm not planning to repeat it." Frank didn't argue with me, not that night and not in the weeks that followed, though he did make sure, more than once, that I understood exactly what I was setting in motion before any of it became irreversible. By Monday morning, he had drafted a formal demand letter to Renee and Todd, calling due the $40,000 I had put toward their mortgage as an informal, undocumented loan, structured now, at my direction, as a note payable in full within 90 days. By Wednesday, I had sat down with him and rewritten the entire succession plan for Reams Precision Tooling, the business I had built with my own 2 hands from a rented garage bay, removing both my daughters entirely as future owners or beneficiaries. In their place, I named my plant manager, Dolores Vance, a woman who has worked beside me for 18 years and who has forgotten more about running that shop than most people ever learn, along with a scholarship trust for the children of my employees. Kids who'd grow up watching their own parents build something real with their hands the way I once had. The life insurance policy took a single afternoon to change. Instead of Renee and Josie, equal beneficiaries as it had read since the year Josie was born, I named the Fort Wayne Fallen Officers Memorial Fund, a charity that supports the children of police officers and firefighters killed in the line of duty. Carol had always had a soft spot for that particular cause, ever since a young officer named Danny Kowalski, the son of a family we'd known for years, was killed responding to a domestic call when he was only 26, leaving behind a wife and a little girl not even in kindergarten yet. I thought about that little girl a great deal in those weeks. I thought about how she'd give almost anything for a father who simply showed up, who simply called. I didn't do any of it out of spite. I want to be clear about that, because I know how this can sound from the outside, a bitter old man rewriting his will in a fit of anger. That's not what this was. It was the opposite of anger, if I'm honest. It was clarity, the kind that only shows up once you've stopped fighting the truth of a thing and simply let yourself see it plainly. My daughters had told me, in their own words, standing in a living room I helped save from the bank, that I was a problem to be managed. I was simply taking them at their word. The calls started about 3 weeks later. Renee called first. I let it ring twice before I picked up, the way I always do now, a habit I developed in those first raw days after the invitation showed up in my mailbox. "Dad," her voice was different this time, smaller. "The bank called about the mortgage. They're saying there's a lien filed, some kind of formal note due in 90 days. What is going on?" "That's the loan I gave you and Todd," I said, keeping my voice even. $40,000, 4 years ago, when you were about to lose the house. I never made you sign anything for it because I didn't think I'd need to. I think I need to now." Dead silence on the line. The kind that stretches out long enough you start to wonder if the call dropped. "You're calling in a loan we didn't even know was a loan," she finally said, her voice climbing. "Dad, that money saved our house. You never said a word about paying it back." "I never expected to have to," I said. "I gave it to you because you're my daughter, and you were drowning, and I would have done it again tomorrow if you needed it. But 3 weeks ago, you told me I'm a problem you have to manage, and that boundaries mean I don't get to be at your sister's wedding. I'm simply respecting the boundary you set, Renee. It just turns out boundaries run in both directions." "That's not fair," she said, and I could hear, underneath the anger, something closer to panic starting to creep into her voice. "Todd's business had a rough quarter. We don't have $40,000 sitting around, Dad, you know that." "I know," I said. "That's between you and the bank now. I've stepped back, the way you asked me to." She hung up on me. I sat at my kitchen table holding a phone gone silent, and felt something I hadn't expected to feel in that moment. Not triumph. Just a strange, settled kind of grief, the sense of watching a door swing shut on its own weight after you've already let go of the handle. Josie called 2 days after that, and her approach was different, softer at first, the way it always had been growing up, the daughter who cried more easily and hoped tears might do what argument couldn't. "Dad, please," she said. "Marcus and I just found out Reams' precision isn't part of the estate plan anymore. Dolores called him by accident, thought he already knew, and now everything's a mess. Why would you do that? That business is supposed to be ours someday." "It was supposed to be," I said, "before your sister explained to me that I'm a burden to manage. A business is something you build for people who want to carry it forward, Josie. You've never once, in 29 years, expressed an interest in tooling and manufacturing. I always assumed that was fine, that I'd sell it and split the proceeds between you and your sister someday. But you've made it clear you don't want that kind of connection to me anymore. I'm respecting that. This isn't about the business, and you know it," she said, her voice cracking. "This is about the wedding. You're punishing me for the wedding." "No," I said, and I meant it as gently as I could manage. "I'm not punishing you for anything. I'm simply no longer propping up a life for people who've told me they don't want me in it. That's not punishment, Josie. That's just what happens when a person stops holding something up." She was crying by the end of that call. Real tears, I think, not the performance I'd half expected. But I had learned something in those 3 weeks since the living room in Carmel, something it had taken me 64 years to fully understand. Real tears and real accountability are not always the same thing, and a father has to learn, eventually, to tell the difference. They showed up at my house together about 5 weeks after that phone call, Renee and Todd, Josie and Marcus, all four of them pulling into my driveway on a Sunday afternoon I hadn't been expecting anyone. I watched them get out of 2 separate cars through my front window, and something in my chest went very still and very quiet, the way it does right before you already know what's coming. I opened the door before they could knock. Renee's eyes were red-rimmed, the kind of tired that comes from weeks of bad sleep, not just one bad night. Josie stood half a step behind her, Marcus's hand on her shoulder, and Todd hung back near the cars like he'd rather be anywhere else on earth, same as he had that day in the living room. "Can we come in?" Renee said. Not really a question. I stepped aside and let them into the house their mother and I had raised them in. The same living room where Carol used to sit wrapping Christmas presents on the floor every December while the girls fought over which paper got used on which gift. I sat down in my recliner. They arranged themselves on the couch across from me, the same configuration as that day in Carmel, only now it was my daughters sitting stiff and my son-in-law standing quiet by a fireplace that wasn't his. Renee spoke first, her composure from that living room 5 weeks earlier entirely gone now. "Dad, we're going to lose the house. The bank's calling the note due in 6 weeks and we don't have it, and refinancing at our current rate is going to nearly double our payment. Please, you have to call them. Tell them it was a misunderstanding." "It wasn't a misunderstanding," I said, my voice level, almost gentle, the way I'd promised myself it would stay no matter what happened in this room. "I loaned you $40,000 4 years ago because I loved you and you needed help. I never once regretted that. What I regret is standing in your living room 3 weeks after Carol's granddaughters, my granddaughters, someday, might have asked why Grandpa wasn't at their mother's wedding, and hearing you tell me I was something you had to manage. That's not what this is about," Josie said, jumping in now, her voice climbing toward the same desperate edge Harry's had in the original, though of course she had no way of knowing that. "You're being cruel, Dad." "This is cruel. We're your daughters." "I know exactly whose daughters you are," I said. "I was there for both births. I was there for every fever, every scraped knee, every recital, every tuition payment, every single time either of you needed something and I could provide it. I built a company with my own hands, so neither of you would ever have to worry the way I did as a boy. And 5 weeks ago, you told me that made me a problem. So I stopped being a problem, the exact way you asked me to." "We didn't mean it like that," Renee said, and for a moment I thought I saw something genuine crack through, the same flicker I'd caught in Josie's face that day in the living room. But it closed back up fast, replaced by something harder, more practiced. "You're twisting our words to justify punishing us." "I'm not punishing anyone," I said. "I'm simply no longer holding up a life for people who told me, in their own words, standing in their own living room, that they don't need me hovering, hedging, or managing anything about their lives anymore. You wanted independence. I'm giving it to you completely." Marcus, who had been silent this whole time, finally spoke, his voice careful, almost apologetic. "Mr. Reams, I want you to know, I never agreed with keeping you off the guest list. I told Josie that from the start." Josie shot him a look sharp enough to cut glass, and he went quiet again, but something in me softened slightly toward him, the way it hadn't toward either of my daughters in that room. "Then why are you here, Marcus?" I asked, instead of standing up for that when it mattered. He didn't have an answer. Neither, I noticed, did Josie. Todd finally spoke from his post by the fireplace, his voice tight with a kind of controlled panic. "Walter, be reasonable. We're family. Families help each other through hard times. You can't just cut us off financially because of hurt feelings." "Hurt feelings," I repeated slowly, and for the first time in that entire conversation, I felt something close to genuine anger rise up through the calm I'd been holding on to. "Todd, I watched my wife die of cancer 6 years ago, and I did not once ask either of these girls to manage their grief around my schedule. I have shown up for every single milestone in both of their lives without fail for 29 years. And 3 weeks after they told me, to my face, that I was a burden to be handled, you're standing in my living room asking me to bail out a mortgage I only helped with in the first place out of love, not obligation. That's not hurt feelings, son. That's the first time in my entire life I've believed the two of them when they told me exactly what they thought of me." The room went quiet after that, quiet enough to hear the hallway clock ticking. The same clock Carol had bought at an estate sale 30 years ago, and never once let me replace. Josie was the one who finally broke, tears coming now, and I believe they were real. The way real tears can still coexist with a person who hasn't yet understood what they actually did wrong. "Dad, please. I don't want to get married without you there. I never wanted that. Renee said it would be simpler, that you'd cause a scene, that Mom would have understood keeping the peace." "Don't," I said, and my voice cracked just slightly on that single word, the only moment in that entire conversation where it did. "Don't you dare put your mother's name on that decision. Your mother spent every single Sunday of her life making sure this family stayed close, stayed kind, stayed together. She would never, not for one single second, have told either of you it was all right to erase your own father from your wedding day." Renee's face had gone pale, and I watched something shift behind her eyes, something that looked, for the first time since this whole thing started, like real understanding instead of rehearsed justification. "Dad, I'm sorry," she said, quiet now, all the earlier composure gone. "I didn't think about it that way. I was just trying to keep things simple, keep the day easy." "Easy for who?" I asked. "Because it certainly wasn't easy for me, finding out about my own daughter's engagement through a piece of mail addressed to her dead mother." Nobody had an answer for that. I stood up from my recliner, walked to the window, and looked out at the front yard where I'd taught both of them to ride bikes on Saturday mornings, while Carol watched from the porch with coffee in hand. "I'll tell you both something," I said, still facing the window, "and then I think it's time for you to go. I'm not doing this out of spite. I want that understood clearly because I think somewhere in your minds you've already decided that's what this is, an old man throwing a tantrum because he didn't get invited to a party. This isn't that. I loved raising the two of you more than anything I've ever done in my life. including building a business from nothing. But 3 weeks ago, you looked me in the eye and told me I was something to be managed, hedged against, minimized. I believed you. I'm simply living according to what you told me was true. So that's it, Renee said quietly. You're not going to help with the house. No, I said. I'm not. I think, honestly, it's the first real chance either of you has had in years to find out exactly what you're capable of without me standing behind you like a steel beam nobody ever thanks. That's not cruelty, Renee. Someday, I hope you'll understand that's the last real gift I have left to give either of you. They left, not long after that, quieter than they'd arrived, no dramatic slamming of doors, just the low murmur of four adults walking back to two separate cars in a driveway that used to be full of bicycles and sidewalk chalk. I stood at the window and watched the taillights disappear down the street, and I felt the same strange, settled grief I'd felt after Renee's first phone call, except now there was something else sitting alongside it. Something that, if I'm honest, felt almost like peace. I went to see Frank again the following week, and this time it wasn't about pulling names off documents. It was about building something new. I want to set up a scholarship, I told him, sliding my coffee aside to make room for the folder he'd brought. Full ride, 4 years, for kids of Fort Wayne first responders killed in the line of duty. I want Dolores to help me administer it once I'm gone, since she'll be running the shop by then anyway. Frank looked at me over his glasses, the same careful look he'd given me the night I first called about pulling Renee's loan agreement into something formal. You thought this through, Walter? Once this is filed, it's not something you casually undo. I've thought about very little else for weeks, I said. There's a little girl in this town, Danny Kowalski's daughter, who's going to grow up without a father who'd have given absolutely anything to see her graduate high school, to walk her down an aisle someday. My daughters have a father standing right in front of them, alive, healthy, willing, and they decided a few weeks ago that having me around was more trouble than it was worth. I'd like what I built to go to someone who'd actually understand what it means to have it. Frank didn't try to talk me out of it. He just nodded, made his notes, and got to work, the way a good lawyer does when he can see a man has finally landed somewhere solid after weeks of falling. Months passed after that. The calls from Renee and Josie slowed, then mostly stopped, an occasional text around a holiday that I answered politely and without much warmth, because I have found, in the year since, that warmth is something you extend to people who've shown they know what to do with it. I heard, through Dolores, who still occasionally crosses paths with Josie at the grocery store, that the wedding happened after all, smaller than originally planned, at a courthouse, instead of the venue on that gold foil invitation, because the money for the larger version had evaporated along with several other things that spring. I won't pretend that didn't sting when I heard it. It did. Some nights, it still does. But every time that ache creeps back in, I think about that living room in Carmel, about the word boundary landing in my chest like a verdict, about driving home in silence with an invitation in my pocket that was never meant for my hands at all. And the ache settles back down to where it belongs. I sit on my back porch most evenings now, right around sunset, coffee in hand, watching the light fade slow and orange over a yard where two girls once learned to ride bikes. I stayed up half the night assembling on a Christmas Eve 30 years gone. Sometimes Dolores stops by after a long week at the shop, and we sit out there and talk about nothing in particular. The business, the weather, an old joke about a supplier who's been late on a shipment for going on 6 years now. It's a smaller life than the one I imagined for myself at 64. But it's an honest one, built on people who show up because they want to, not because a signature on a mortgage or a business succession plan requires it of them. My daughters have their own lives now. They made that painfully clear. Standing in a living room I helped save from foreclosure, telling me I was a burden they decided together to manage instead of love. I've spent a year now learning what it means to actually take them at their word. And somewhere out there, there's a little girl who never got the chance to know her father, who's going to open a scholarship letter someday with my name on it and understand, in a way I hope she never truly has to earn the hard way, what it looks like when someone shows up for you simply because they can.